I am super excited to have Brittany here, who is going to close us out. And she's actually talking about something that's really near and dear to my heart. And I'm sure to everyone, because everyone's working remote now. Well, most people are. And we sort of had to do working remote suddenly with the pandemic. And yeah, there's just been for me, it's definitely been a bit of a culture change. Well, it hasn't been a culture change for me, but it's been a culture change for everyone that I work with. So I'm super glad and excited to hear your talk. And so I'm going to hand it over to you to get started.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Labrina. Hello, everyone. Okay, like I said, let me go ahead and share my screen. I've got all these up now. And then, of course, Teams minimizes. So let me find you all again.
We're still here, so don't worry.
Okay. Is it this one? Okay, cool. I've got the participants up. I've got you. Okay, and you see my slides, onboard your new developers remotely.
We do.
All right. Perfect. All right, 3 o'clock. Let's hit it. Okay. Hello, everyone. I am so excited to be here today. Let's go ahead and get started. My name is Brittany. I am a software engineer located in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I currently work at a digital agency that's actually based in Chicago. I'm a remote engineer. And yeah, you can find me on Twitter. I'm MintyB, and my website is tnotes.dev. And I'll be taking questions at the end of this. So feel free to throw them in Discord, or you'll have a moment to raise your hand at the end. So everyone, go ahead and take a moment, close your eyes. I'm sure you've been staring at the screen for a bit, and just imagine with me, what was your best onboarding experience at a company? What were some of the qualities of it? Maybe it was the people that you got to meet, some of the work that you were being introduced to. Now allow a moment to imagine your worst experience. And what were some of the things that really were not enjoyable? What were the repercussions of that bad experience? What shaped your opinions about how all of that played out, either the good or the bad moments? And then when you actually joined your team, were there any new ceremonies that you went through to onboard with them? Was it just onboarding with the company overall, or did you go through an onboarding process with your individual team? And now for the final prompt, for these onboarding experiences, if they weren't remote, imagine them remote. Do any of these experiences translate well into a remote atmosphere? Let's go ahead and let's talk about it. I would imagine that a lot of those really awesome experiences and bad experiences would be totally different if we were remote. And that's what we're going to talk about today. It's a couple different factors about why I think you should care, why I feel very passionate about this today. The majority of companies and teams are new to remote. Just as Labrina had mentioned, the past year has been globally very shifting for companies. Evaluating your onboarding process will likely reveal any additional inefficiencies or inequities. So if there continue to be metrics that are causing your company to fall flat on some of these goals, there might be places that stem right from the onboarding experiences of your employees. You should care because the talent pipeline of recruiting and hiring, onboarding and retaining people is very expensive. And so you want to be spending your money as a company wisely. And then lastly, onboarding is the single most important indicator of success and tenure of an employee. And I'll touch on that a couple of points throughout today. So some of the baseline assumptions that I want us to start off with is that you recognize that curiosity and experimentation are the spices to amazing work. And those are going to be spices that you also want to lean into as you explore onboarding, as you explore remote work, as well as bringing on new employees. I would say that we all collectively have two truths today. One is that we all have belly buttons, and the second is that we all have onboarded somewhere. Whether it is even academically, we've onboarded at some point, right? But we have some of these experiences that we can hold to and use as inspiration during this talk. And then last, you're here to learn how to either impact your own team or to make a new team member have a really awesome experience. Maybe your experience was bad joining this team, but you really want that next person to feel like they belong and that they're going to have a great journey. So let me go ahead and talk a little bit more about my personal experience and why I wanted to talk about this today. I have been at 2 companies in the past year. I started at a company in January of 2020, and I got to onboard in person, and it was awesome. And everyone was super friendly, and I felt like it was a really great experience. I remember going to work like sometime in February of last year thinking, wow, I really can't wait to be able to stay here for a long term. I think this is going to be a place for me. I'm a boot camp graduate. I think this is going to be a great place for me to develop my skills even more strongly and eventually work my way to being a senior engineer. But what had happened was about 2.5 months into it, the pandemic kicked off and we were all thrown to being remote. And so it really felt like I was starting this job twice. I had a really amazing onboarding experience in person, and then I was thrown to being remote, where there was a lot of confusion, there was a lot of learning to be done, and it ultimately was not a really great experience. And while it was a big company and there was a lot of resources that were available to help with the impacts of the pandemic, I ultimately left that company because I did not feel supported and I did not feel that I was being supported effectively as an engineer. A lot of it was kind of sink or swim. So earlier this year, I started my second job, this time fully remote. This is a company that is currently going through a process of establishing itself as a hybrid company. So there's been a lot of focus and a lot of planning and intention to make both my onboarding experience to be something that is a new ceremony for new engineers, new people overall, and then also just a new embrace of how the company operates. For both of these, there are some pros to it. I did get to start with the first day buddy, and I really like that. For both of these, there is a huge emphasis on the company culture, the company values, and how things are operating. And then when it came down to onboarding onto the teams, at my first job, that company was had been around for, actually both of them have been around for 10 plus years. And so with the engineering team I was joining, it was a lot of historical knowledge to ramp up on, code that I was working in a code base that you could find commits that trace back to the co-founders coding into that same code base. And so there's a lot of excitement to learn. And then at my second job, I'm actually a consultant now. And so onboarding as a developer has been a lot more of ramping up and learning what is effective for that particular client that I'm on. Overall, building an emphasis that is supportive and inclusive of how we're working remotely. Now, there are some cons with it. Those are all the pros. Some of the cons was that it was a massive engineering company. There was easily 800 plus developers or engineers in some capacity. And so there's a lot of engineering going on. How do I fit into that? What are the stakeholders that I should be paying attention to? When I first was in person, it was, oh, well, these departments sit in these places, and these are the people you should meet. All of that kind of gets a bit more fuzzy when I am remote. And rituals were falling flat. What was emphasized as this is a great thing to do in person was really getting confusing and draining in a remote experience. The cons of my second job, I'm still here. It's been great. I'm gonna throw some negativity to both, my current team, my current company, we had an 11-week onboarding program, meeting 1 hour each week. It wasn't that super involved, but it emphasized the culture and the company objectives. But I would say that it still missed out on a lot of affecting onboarding as a developer, where it came with here's our GitHub accounts, and here's the secret keys, and here's some of the different tools that you should be setting up on your computer. Past that, it was really up to the onus of me as an engineer to know what questions I should be asking and what are the things that I should be actively seeking out to understand. And overall, it's a company of a see something, say something culture. And how does that really effectively translate remotely? So that's been my experience. It's been a very exciting year and a half, as I'm sure everyone else could testify. But I just wanted to kind of paint the scene about where I'm coming from with this. A lot of this is my own perspective. A lot of this is my own experience. And this is a topic that was not only something that I was really actively trying to find an answer to, but I want to be able to make that next person that joins my team or the next company that I go to be an effective onboarding experience. So yeah, so 2 rad companies, no shade to both of them. They're still both amazing places, but 2 different onboarding experiences. And even of my previous companies, all of them have been very different, both good and bad. And really the truth is very few companies have a plan when it comes to onboarding. I was coming into this today with this talk, wanting to emphasize a lot more about like qualitatively, what does this all look like? But I think what I really want to do today is just talk about the basics, that very few people actually have onboarding. Very few companies have onboarding, and even fewer have a plan for developers. And so that's something that we really need to be considering, especially as we go remote. A lot of the different ceremonies and habits that we have made in person are falling by the wayside. Now, a lot of this is inspired by the scene from the TV show Arrested Development, where the mother, Lucille Bluth, is having a bit of a spat with her son, Buster, who is enlisting into the army and about to go to Iraq. And she says, "I may not have been a perfect mother, but you know, kids don't come with a handbook." And what's really popular about this TV show is that there's a very funny narrator. So the narrator says, "In fact, there were thousands of books written on child rearing." And it shows a picture of some search results of Amazon and over thousands of books. But Lucille was in denial. I'm definitely reminded about this when it comes to how some of these companies may approach onboarding or may approach wanting to build effective and healthy teams and individuals, is that they say there's not a lot of information out there on where to go and how to navigate this. And I wouldn't say that there actually is, because there actually isn't very much. So if we stick with the same scene, the joke of the show, if I go to Amazon, if I search onboarding, there actually are thousands of results. Onboarding for all different types of roles. But when we narrow it down to what is onboarding for a developer, don't see a lot of results coming up. And even then, the ones that do come up are still not necessarily in line with what does it take to make an effective developer, and what does it take to bring somebody on the team to be productive. So the success is on the onus of the individual developer. How we see this is the numerous books, and we've even had a few mentioned during the conference today, of books that we want to read to ramp up and be amazing engineers. There's hundreds and hundreds of lists on what does it take to be a good developer. Even if we move past books, the types of curriculum and the types of case studies out there are still quite limited. And yet a lot of this material about as an individual, how can I improve myself, are framed into two different categories. One is it's a preparation for an interview. If I go back for a second, for example, cracking the coding interview. Once I get a job, do I really need to know what's in this book? And it's a thick book. If anybody has not seen this personally, it's a thick book. Or software engineering at Google, that may work if I'm joining Google, but of hundreds and thousands of other types of companies where I can join as a developer, is this going to be very effective? And then outside of that, you have some very specific use cases, such as working effectively with legacy code. Maybe I read this whole book and I get to a team and suddenly it's, oh, you're actually developing on Greenfield. Well, none of this really is super actionable now. Or there are some really great use cases like the DevOps handbook, but that's in a very particular field with a very particular scope of what's effective. So I want to go now into talking about what is some of the research that is available about onboarding. I'm talking about like there's none of this, there's none of that, but what is out there? And so I'll start off first by just explaining what makes onboarding great and what makes employees happy. The company Bamboo HR surveyed 1,000 full-time employees in the United States. And here's some of the stats that came out about it. An effective onboarding program leads to 30 times higher job satisfaction. You have 30% more engaged employees. People feel 48 times more supported. I thought that was an interesting metric. And then there's just increasing confidence in the job ability, the role clarity, and as well as a faster time to contributing to the team. So going back to the beginning, when you're imagining that really negative onboarding experience, after you got out of that, did you feel satisfied? Did you feel like you were engaged? Did you really understand what your job was going to be about? If it's anything like my own personal experience, I would say no. It leads to a lot more confusion and a lot more just uncertainty about where you're placed. So onboarding is a huge miss for many organizations. I believe this information came from Gallup poll. 35% of companies spend $0 on onboarding. And so just imagine what could be more effective if even just the smallest amount of money was emphasized. Passive onboarding is going to be situations like, here's the checklist, go off and complete it and you'll be great. I definitely had passive onboarding at my first job. I had I think it was a 5-page Google Doc of just checklists of like, go and check out this, or go sign up for this, go read up on X, Y, and Z. And so at a certain point, you just become busy with the everyday demands of, well, I have to start programming, I have to work on this feature, I have to go and do all these different types of ceremonies that are with the pace and the momentum of the team. A lot of that kind of eventually falls by the wayside and it isn't reintroduced again. And even then, with passive onboarding, if there's no one to follow up to say, hey, how's it going with these different topics? It's not really situated into like an actionable goal. And 60% of companies are not setting goals. So what I wanted to do first was take a look into, well, what kind of models are out there about onboarding? And I went all the way back to 1979 when computers were the size of rooms. And what I saw was these two researchers, Van Manen and Sheen, who talked about 6 different models for onboarding. And so I'll go through them quickly. Collective versus individual. So if you have a whole onboarding plan overall, you want to be imagining what are the different categories are each of these different actions going to be including. So collective would be something like, for me, I was previously a customer service representative. And so collectively, all new people went through a month-long training where we sat in a classroom and we learned about what our role was about. Individual would have been, here's a book, here's some sort of virtual onboarding, and go and learn your job. Formal is going to be where, once again, you're in a classroom, you're learning with people who are also needing to learn. Informal would be where, for example, mob programming, where we all pal around and we're going to learn about this. Sequential versus random would be, for example, if we go back to that example of like a checklist, sequential would be you're going to start out at the top and you're going to ease people in step by step into what are the roles, what are the tools, what are the different responsibilities that they may have, versus random, where all of those are just kind of scattershot and a person is learning about them as necessary. So I think for me, of my first company I joined, it was a lot of individual. It was a lot of informal onboarding. The most formal part of it was I pair programmed with somebody for the first, I think, week or two. And then once we shipped that code and got it approved, it was kind of like I was all up to my own to do whatever. The serial versus disjunctive, I would say, is the experienced developers who are tasked with, being that kind of anchor for the new person joining the team. And then their last is investiture versus divestiture, which is a mouthful. But essentially it means, is this onboarding to celebrate the uniqueness of somebody joining the company? Or is it to kind of scrub away what they are and kind of prop these people up as blank canvases to, place the company mission and values on it? So those are a lot of different steps, right? So what I saw next was, about 10 years later, G.R. Jones was like, you know what, that's too much. We're going to trim this down to two different categories. Can we have onboarding be institutionalized, which is formal with mentoring, or can we have it individualized, where it just kind of is on the fly, where people are still kind of roughly being shaped based on the company's norms and values? So out of this research, I would ask, what do you typically experience with your own career journey as you go about building up your own onboarding for your developers and your teams? Think about, where is it that you need support? Where is it that you need people actually present to guide the new person through? And what is it that could just be things that are on the fly, things that are a bit more individual? And all of this is to say that it's going to be more than just the first week of onboarding. A lot of what I've read is that there's this misconception that you only onboard for the first week. And the answer to that is it's actually a much wider spectrum. So with this researcher, Bauer, in 2011, they described onboarding as a cycle. It starts off with the interaction, with the first interaction of a candidate in recruiting. And from there, we go through orientation, which is that typical assumption of onboarding, that orientation to learn about the company. Here's the HR paperwork to fill out. Maybe there's some tests that you have to do. That fits in just one of the 6 perspectives. Everything else is going to be them joining on their team and going through different topics. So tools and processes, it's going to look like some sort of written plan. It's going to look like introducing them to all the different stakeholder meetings. It's going to look like learning about all the different software that's necessary for the role. Once again, we see mentorship coming up with coaching and support. This is going to look either formal or informal. It really depends on the type of onboarding process that you want to create. And then the training is emphasized as hard skills or soft skills. But I would say that training is going to look like, as a developer, in even more different steps that I don't have the opportunity to explain here. Maybe that is training for support, being on call. That's training for the different responsible programs and applications. And then it also emphasizes soft skills here. So what's the training for design thinking? That was something brought up earlier today. What does the training look like for sexual harassment or diversity, equity, inclusion kind of initiatives? And then lastly is feedback, which could be framed as just constant feedback, like you're having one-on-ones with people, you're getting input from your mentor, your buddy, or it could look like your typical end of the year performance reviews. All this whole cycle, though, just circles back to it of once a person is able to go through this whole cycle, they're now knowing like, oh, well, I can recruit now, I can help out and know what looks best joining this team. And if not that, then they're also giving feedback to the cycle on what can I be improving for the next person. And that whole cycle, if it's a bad experience, it's very costly. It's estimated it's about $50,000 for a developer if it's a bad hire. And that goes up even more when you go with seniority based on the executive level of an individual. It can be very costly. So Brandon Hall Group, which is an HR company, they categorize this into a couple different points of what could lead to a bad hire. So whether it's a poor interview process, your brand is very weak for the company. If no one knows really what's happening inside of your company, once an individual gets to that team, they're going to be like, wait, this is totally different than what I was expecting. I thought this was a company that programmed in Python, and suddenly I'm here and I'm working in Ruby. There's a lot of different kind of expectations that can be missed. And then also included in this, of course, is the poor onboarding process. There's also an emphasis on just having more data to back this up. If you're not, if you're onboarding people and you're not considering each step of the way as a data metric, something to be able to evaluate, even on the long span of time, then you're missing out on a lot of different nuances of what can be improved. So that's enough about onboarding, because that's about onboarding for the whole company, right? Let's talk about who the most important people, the developers, and hopefully those who are not developers on this call takes that offensively. It was just a joke. The truth is that developers were fickle as fuck. There is a 15% turnover rate with our industry. And even then, people who join the company, they're usually staying at the company on average of 18 months. I stayed at my last company for, I think, 14 months. So I'm definitely guilty. And overall, we're seeing about $22 billion wasted each year on onboarding developers who are soon to leave. So all this emphasis on, recruiting the right people, all these shiny, these shiny things to entice people to join really is at a loss. And then when it comes to joining a company, I saw a lot of different numbers for this, but overall, it takes about 3 to 12 months for a developer to be productive on the team. So we have a lot to improve here, because as these stats show, if we're not improving it, we're just cycling the problem again and again. So this is just a joke, but raise your hand if you're considering jumping jobs right now. Maybe you're sitting and flipping through LinkedIn or Glassdoor, or fielding the 16,000 recruiters who are reaching out to you every day and thinking, maybe there is something better out there. And what I was reading about is that the bad methods continue to persist. We have a lot of different strategies on what we consider effective onboarding, with like heavy quotes emphasized for a developer, but all of them still are quite weak. So there's 8 points here. So I'll just highlight a few of them. The first one is, let's throw this new developer some backlog tasks. They're going to join on the team. We've got some easy, low-hanging fruit that they can go and fix. There's some bugs that they can fix, and it's going to be great. And they'll figure out how we do stuff here. But what the issue with that is that it doesn't share knowledge. I'm opening up. So at my first company, we as a company worked in a giant mono repo, and it was about 5 gigabytes to download. It was a huge file. And so, yeah, I'm going to do this low-hanging fruit, but I'm also just like a little shell shock when it comes to seeing all this code. What all is happening? I don't know what it takes to absorb all of this effectively. Okay, well, if we look at, I've already talked about point 3, but maybe the answer to that question is, okay, well, we're going to match you with a senior engineer, and you'll pair with them until you're productive. Okay, but is this engineer on board with this? This is probably a topic for a whole nother conversation. Is the more seniority that you have, the more busy that you are. Is there enough? Is there either enough autonomy to establish a boundary with the senior person, or do they want to do it? Or, is this effective of their time? Because that's also an expensive person to have as a dedicated mentor. Okay, well, maybe it's point 6. We've got you in the code base. We want you to go and read all these really awesome pull requests that we've had over time. You'll learn all the history of our code base. Okay, again, there's not a lot of context with that and a lot of knowledge sharing. I'm seeing what the code is doing, but that only illustrates one story about it, right? There's still a lot that can illustrate what is happening with an application. And number 7, we sacrificed a lamb. We've protected this person to the point that they're now our developer champion, and they'll shepherd you to what is productivity. And woo, that's a lot of undue burden. Once again, did that person sign up for this? I would say that within 3 months, that person is probably burning out or feeling a lot of their efforts, like improving documentation, championing different teams to adopt new practices, can really burn out somebody unless they're fully supported. And the last one is, just do the thing. Just go have fun with it. We'll be here for you when you need help. And really, that's just a bad compromise, because you've given up on trying to embrace and support this new person, and you're just like, everything's broken. I'm broken. You're broken. We're just going to have to roll with it. So a lot of these are really bad methods. So I wanted to touch now on what are some of the empirical studies that show what is effective for a developer, what is effective for us to onboard successfully. So the first one is a story that goes, or a study that goes way back, and it talks about the naturalization process, where onboarding is likened to immigration. When documentation is lacking, there's a huge burden for the mentors and consultants to ramp up this person, and it can be very frustrating and can prolong the naturalization process. So some of the things that I saw that helps to aid in the naturalization was mentoring, which we're going to see that mentioned a lot. I think that's something that we can all assume is good, and that continues to be supported. The next one was, to help the aid in naturalization, there's going to be a lot of things that you have to learn with the software. So can you build an effective plan to scaffold somebody to ramp up and learn those things, rather than just kind of opening up that box of, imagine that box of, everyone's got that box of wires, right? Imagine that box of wires, you can just dump it on somebody. That's probably not the most effective way to do it. Can you maybe sort them out and not like throw a tidal wave at them? Can you establish what are the first assignments that this person is going to be learning? Like I previously mentioned, like if you do want to create some low-hanging fruits for a developer to complete, can you scaffold that so that they're able to learn effectively about the application and the system? Because what this study showed is that it really is the biggest indicator of success. So if it's a bad first task to do, it's going to lead to bad success. And then ultimately for naturalization, there does need to be some sort of job fit, whether it's the interest the individual holds with the company, or just kind of like a meshing of personality, a meshing and embracing of even the differences of personality. Is there a job fit? The next study was, even if an individual rocks at writing code, there's still a huge swath of different topics that can inhibit success. So studying, this is a study that came from Microsoft with new software developers, and they shadowed their job, including their time coding, their time debugging, designing, and engaging with the team. And what they saw was that being able to know how to ask questions can be a very difficult inhibitor. Being an effective member to the team, it can be hard to know really where you're placed if it's not laid out explicitly. Learning about the tools and testing, I would say from my own personal experience, that's definitely changed with each job and journey that I've gone through. So are you building a clear and transparent protocol about what is a testing philosophy? What are the tools? Why do we use the tools? Is there an understanding of how to organize the information? And last, are we actually orienting all of this effectively? That's a big ask, which is kind of like, no, we're not. But that could just mean, are you bringing this person on and leading them through the way that makes sense? That kind of goes back to some of the other research about onboarding. Is it a sequential onboarding process, or is it random? Next, the learning landscape. This is about 18 individuals who joined 18 different projects, so kind of a small user case. But what they found is that a landscape characterizes how easy it is for folks to join and settle in, and it's paced out among these different categories: products, processes and practices, the team, learning about the documentation, learning about the context of everything, like what are we doing? Why are we here? And what they found with this is that the most effective facilitator for this is actually a human guide. So just as we're going through like a nature trail, going out for a hike, seeing how other people are navigating through that trail is really effective on another person's onboarding. Is there a path that has been dug out? Are there signposts of like, watch out for the bears, don't eat those berries, don't ship code that looks like this? That's really effective to help new people navigate. And the last one is no surprise to anyone, but schools are not teaching everything. What? And so this last study, researchers interviewed software practitioners, and all the practitioners were just frustrated. They're just like, there's all these new people, these young whippersnappers joining the team, and they know nothing about testing, and it's so frustrating. And what was effective was, well, I guess we're going to have some mentorship with this. No surprise there. And we're going to have to put into place some sort of training, because even if we go and get the best and the brightest from these different companies, we still see that there's a huge gap in what leads to productivity on the team. And yes, the larger companies can embrace this. You know, if you're $1 billion, $1 trillion, you can just continue to throw money and there's going to be a solution out of this all. But with smaller companies, it's a lot harder. And what they saw was there's a weak correlation with not being able to fully support those new recent graduates onto the team to learn about how they're to be an effective developer. They saw a weak correlation with that onboarding experience and resources with the outcome of that developer. And so you might be wondering, okay, like she's just showing us all this stuff from like the last year. And no, really, actually, this is like research that spans across like decades. A lot of this is not new. And you know, once again, I want to emphasize is that we should be looking into some of this historical information to know how to best shape and cultivate our developers. And so a big takeaway from that is that a supportive team environment with mentorship and feedback shows more job readiness than a formal training and orientation. What that looks like is, I don't think I've experienced formal training as a developer, but if I had to imagine, that's sending somebody off to like some sort of boot camp or some sort of very formalized course. Mentorship and feedback as they go through that journey is more ready. All right. And then effective onboarding makes for a happy developer. When the average, this is just a question, food for thought for everyone, but when the average software engineer is staying at a company for 2 to 3 years, what are we getting for our ROI? We're doing all of this intentional building and onboarding and scaffolding for people, but is there something additional that we're trying to get out of it? So some of the most utilized metrics for assessing your onboarding would be the speed to competency. What does it take for a new person to join the company and ramp up, and so that they're, performing just as successful as the person who's been on the team the longest? How engaged are they? Kind of goes back again to that job fit. If you're at a company that's about building programs for cats, are you a cat person? Are you engaged with the conversations that are about that topic? And then, of course, the retention rate. And last, I'm going to talk about the research for the pandemic. Welcome to Panera. It is not a fun time, and a lot is changing. The pandemic has shaped a lot of things dramatically. There's a really big study that came out about Microsoft over the past year that I'll get into, but one of the biggest metrics that I learned was that before, in 2019, Microsoft had about 18% of its work base remote, and now it's the total company. It may have changed, but I do believe it's still the total company. Pew Research saw that before the pandemic, 20% of the workforce was working from home full time, versus now where it's 71%. And with that, we also see that the engagement overall is declining. And within the United States, our stress level is at an all-time high. We're the most stressed out among the whole country, or the whole world. North Americans have experienced, North Americans, 57% of North American workers say that they have had a stressful day within the past week, or they worry about stress every day. And presently, like, it's 2021, it's October, and like we're still all over the place. Are people going back to work? Are people staying at home? Are we becoming a remote company? Do I need to get vaccinated? Do I have to prove my disabledness to be able to stay at home? I'm so burnt out. All I can feel like is this. It's a lot. And so it's just a constant moving target. Yes. So like I said, with Microsoft, they did a huge study with this change about like how effective is remote working right now? Are we doing our best? And one of the biggest things that they saw was that the communication was really getting lost. There was a huge strengthening of silos. So, your team is just talking to your team, and, any other sibling teams or cousin teams, if you imagine it like that, there's a much greater lack of engagement across the company. There's the collaboration is minimizing. It is understandably, I think, a growing investment in innovation to see how can we collaborate remotely. And then I just showed some pictures here, some graphs of what some of that looks like. Let's see. I think, yeah, this graph here in the far right shows the weak ties and how they're just growing even weaker. Weak ties is defined as how often are you talking to people? And what they saw is that you talk to your team a ton, and those are just like your strong ties just get amplified. But any other individuals that are further and further outside of your team, like you're hardly talking to them. And yeah, so there's companies and leaders right now like Jamie Dimon, who's like, we really need to go back into the office. We really need to, be back in person. This is a hurt for the productivity of our company. It's a hurt for innovation, and it's hurting our characteristic. And meanwhile, I just want to call out because like this guy had like major heart surgery last year, and I hope he's doing great. But the inconsistency to say, let's go back in remote when he's actually working remotely still as he recovers from a major operation, I think it just kind of falls flat on about what is the emphasis and the necessity of working remotely. We can be better, both as individual contributors and as leaders, on planning and executing what is needed to support our teammates effectively. So, how are companies thriving? Where are we seeing some of this happen? One of the areas that we're seeing thriving remote companies is with the tools and adoption rate. This is just a picture of all I can kind of think of. We've got email, you've got Slack, you've got different product management tools, different communication apps. Like Microsoft Teams. And, maybe you're rocking the noise canceling headphones now. You're learning about Zoom etiquette. That's one of the really beautiful indicators of adoption, rate of adoption for remote, is that there's lots of different ways that we can be able to leverage this effectively. Remember our agreements from the beginning? We want to be able to take a look at remote work with curiosity. So, consider like, what are the different ways that you work, and are there tools and are there new resources that you can use to just increase the utilization remotely? There are some really great companies that have been remote first, even before 2020, that are coming out with really wonderful playbooks on how their company operates. So some of the examples I wanted to show you today was Pluralsight. They have a whole handbook on how to lead remote teams. GitLab, who is definitely in the news this week with their IPO. They have they tout themselves as one of the largest remote first companies in the world. They have a lot of information on remote working. And then also Zapier is a remote first company, and they have a lot of documentation on how to build a remote company, as well as a nice pitch to show how to automate and increase your tools remotely using Zapier. So I wanted to talk about some of the things that GitLab emphasizes, because I really enjoyed what they had to say. Overall, they really encourage remote work because it's an emphasis on the global pool of talent. No longer are we tied to looking to recruit and hire and onboard people who are within our neighborhoods, but we can span across the world. Even at this conference today, we have people from various different parts of the planet, and that is a similar strive that we can have for our companies. And you want to consider really what is remote in your company, because everyone's going to have a different definition. So they talk about it on a spectrum between 1 to 10. One being there's no remote. 2, 5 is like a hybrid role remote company. To 10 is we're entirely remote based, all remote. So you want to be considering what the different steps you want to have as a company. If I go back real quick, this playbook is where I'm getting this information from. And this playbook just goes a lot more into detail about like, maybe you're still in the process of trying to figure out what is the next step. Like, after being remote for the much of last year and this year, what are you trying to consider moving forward? And this is a really great playbook to consider that. And overall, like remote is going to be a way to be inclusive for everyone. It is a way to really put everyone on a similar working page. They also encourage, I don't go into this too much, but they also encourage to consider hiring someone this is their whole job. They have now created a head of remote, and there's a lot of other companies that are creating that role also, where they're the ones looking into the different types of tools and resources and research and engagement on how to build effective teams. So I can probably go even more into what all GitLab is talking about with remote work. I don't even work for them. This is kind of turning into a semi GitLab Stan account talk, but they do, like I said, have a lot of conversation about remote work. And they even talk about like objectively, like what shouldn't you do? And so, if as you're building a remote team, like don't assume that there are no resources. As I'm talking about in this talk today, there's research available, there's resources, there's companies that are trying to show you for free, unequivocally, how this can go about effectively. Don't just transfer things that were in person to be virtual. You want to take each ceremony and each schedule and habit with some consideration and see how we can make it accessible, how we can make it that everyone can join and have a good time. This is something that's going to take a lot of experimentation, a lot of curiosity. That's kind of the agreement I said at the beginning of this talk is it's not just you do it once and we're good to go. I mean, it's not like that as developers overall, right? As developers, we do something once, we test it, we hope we get something good to go, but we're always going to refactor, right? And this is going to be the same for how we build effective remote teams. And overall, there's a lot of different myths that we should be working to dispel about remote work. There's concerns about control of like, if I let everyone go remote, no one's going to be in the office. And really, the case is you should be emphasizing structure, emphasizing clarity, and talking about what is appropriate remotely. Your culture is going to continue to thrive as long as you give people the tools and the resources to collaborate and come together effectively. And even as things are stabilizing with vaccinations, a lot of companies are talking about like really fun retreats to go on. Yeah, we're going to be remote, but maybe 4 times a year we're going to get together and we're going to celebrate what makes us great. Ultimately, like you should be getting data and asking for preferences. Get input on how you want your company to move forward remotely. Don't simply just take a stab in the dark and think, well, that's it. I tried my best. Don't be Lucille Bluth. There are handbooks for how to do this effectively. So some suggestions on how to improve it, your remote team. This is kind of starting to just wrap up a lot of what we've been talking about today, but embrace transparency. what is it that remains opaque about the processes that your team has? Are there ways that you can leverage either automation to it or technology to it, or even just culture overall that helps to make it so that it's transparent? What are the goals and OKRs that you can have for your team in a remote environment? Maybe once a month you want to get together for a happy hour. What does that look like? What does it look like to prioritize? Prioritizing documentation is a really great way for transparency also. Whether it's you're making decisions, you want to write it up, whether you're having a meeting and somebody can't attend, write up some notes about it. Have an agenda for the meetings that you hold. Make sure that you have closed captioning turned on so everyone can be able to tune in to the talk effectively. And as we go more remote, consider how can we make things more asynchronous? If you're hiring globally, you can't assume that everyone is going to be available in your particular time zone. Can you make this not a meeting? That's a mantra to always consider. Is this necessary to hold space for an hour, or can we just do a Slack check-in? There's lots of different tech to enable this, and unfortunately, I don't have time to be able to dive into that more, but this is something that you want to evaluate frequently. And then a lot of these headers also applies to remote onboarding also. So, if you're hiring somebody, recruiting, hiring, that whole cycle, make sure that you have it transparent. Establish and set the expectations of what the role is going to look like. Can you make some goals and emphasize that there's new people joining? As we saw, the productivity is going to be down. Well, what is the OKR for a new person joining a team? Once again, prioritize documentation. I'm new. I need to know what's happening here. And, a lot of the documentation is going to be out of date. That is a fact. But maybe you can make a fun handbook about it. Maybe you can enlist your junior developers to be the ones taking on a lot of these tasks. Stop throwing it all to the senior engineers. And then how can you automate it? There's a lot of really great automation tools that either you can connect to your code base, or you can even connect to like your project management to be able to spit out some of this so that it's not, it stays up to date and it's not always manual. And then communicate across multiple media. There's other ways that we can be getting together to socialize. And once again, it just takes some experimentation to find what's right and what's effective. Additionally, we want to be talking about mental health. 57% of North American people are stressed right now. There's a pandemic. If you need to emphasize that more, I suggest checking out the World Health Organization. It's a bright red text that says it's a pandemic. So things are still very stressful. So how can we support people and be compassionate about it all? And then ultimately, how can we set boundaries and expectations, both for mentors and for new people? And managers, how can you be creating metrics so you can evaluate and see what's effective about the onboarding experience? And then again, developer success lies in the hands of managers. It lies in the hands of leadership to know where the work and emphasis needs to be placed. So I say it four times here. Take time to evaluate your onboarding. If you haven't done that in a bit, for the last people who've joined the team, or maybe there's somebody who's about to join on Monday, like take some time to look at it. Because what's effective for one individual is not going to be effective for the next person. And so you want to be sure that every new person is joining the team with what's some intention and with some thought and clarity. And it's not just, oh, we've got a new person, great, like you're going to be working on this new feature and like just throw them at that. I put here some questions as a manager. What are some questions that you can be asking your new people? So you're understanding, you're keeping abreast of what their thoughts are, because if anything is to indicate this talk today, they might be thinking about switching within the first 6 months of joining your company. And overall, we're trying to move fast and we're trying to break things, and I think it's just leading to us breaking more. There's a lot of demand from like venture capital. There's a lot of money being thrown. We've got all have new exciting features to build up. But let's slow it down a little bit. We've got tons of new things to be learning as engineers. I don't even want to enumerate them here. 41% of workers globally are considering leaving their jobs. So maybe we want to try to keep them to stay. And I think overall, what I learned from the research of this onboarding is that onboarding effectively has wins not only in diversity, equity, inclusion, but also job engagement and satisfaction. It helps with the company to actually make money and not just burn money. And also, you may be able to just build those people up so they can find success where they are currently instead of jumping to whatever is next. So let's all consider today one action that we can do to make our team better and we can allow new employees to thrive. I want to thank you for joining me today. I am right at the 4 o'clock mark, but thank you, Nova Code Camp. If you've got any questions, I'll definitely field them now. Otherwise, I'll be on Discord. Thank you.
Okay. So Brittany, first off, that was amazing. Thank you so much. You actually gave me so many good tips. I was actually in the background, looking up some stuff. I especially like that GitLab remote handbook. So I actually just downloaded as you were speaking. But yeah, this was an amazing talk and so timely. Thank you for all the great research that you did and really just sharing your experience and being authentic as usual. All right, thanks.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.